Welcome to Echoes of History. We don't just recount the past, we peel back the layers of forgotten lore, chasing the ghosts of giants and villains who shape the world we live in today. If you're ready to step beyond the textbook and into the gripping, untold dramas of human history, hit subscribe and join our journey. Tonight, we plunge into the heart of Imperial Russia, where a simple peasant held a dynasty in his hypnotic gaze. Our narrative begins far from the lavish spectacle of imperial court life. Deep within the harsh, seemingly insignificant landscape of western Siberia, in the small, isolated village of Pokrovskoye. It was here, in 1869, that Grigori Yefimovich Novik, the man history would forever remember as Rasputin, a nickname derived from a Russian word for debauched or licentious, was born into an illiterate peasant family. His early years were shrouded in the mundane reality of rural life. Yet unsettling whispers already circulated about his peculiar nature. Some claimed he possessed clairvoyance, an ability to see future events or read the minds of animals and men with his strangely intense, piercing blue eyes. This ordinary peasant existence was irrevocably broken around the age of 28, when a profound spiritual crisis led him to abandon his family and embark on a life-changing pilgrimage. This wasn't merely a trip, it was a total transformation that remade the peasant Grigori into a self-proclaimed Stranik, a holy wanderer, a man who claimed to have direct, divine dialogue with God and the Virgin Mary. He lacked any formal religious training and was certainly not a monk in the official sense. Yet he traveled across the vast Russian Empire, attracting followers with his fiery sermons and his raw, untamed charisma. This reputation, founded on pure, hypnotic mystique and not ecclesiastical authority, was the currency that propelled him across the social strata, setting him firmly on the path to the imperial capital of St. Petersburg, where the desperation of the ruling family would provide the ultimate opportunity for his spectacular and destructive ascent. The catalyst for Rasputin's spectacular entry into the heart of Russian power was a secret tragedy that shadowed the Romanov Dynasty, the incurable illness of the Tsarevich Alexei, the sole son and heir to the throne. Alexei suffered from hemophilia, a devastating genetic blood disorder passed down by his mother, Empress Alexandra Feodorovna, a granddaughter of Britain's Queen Victoria. In an era before modern medical interventions, a child with this condition lived under a constant, agonizing threat of internal bleeding that could be fatal. The Empress lived in a state of perpetual, frantic anxiety, as court doctors and specialists were helpless to control the Tsarevich's bleeding episodes, which often left him screaming in pain and near death. This deep, private despair, combined with Alexandra's deeply mystical and almost fanatical religious beliefs, created the perfect vulnerability. Having exhausted all rational solutions, the Empress, along with many members of the aristocracy, began searching for spiritual intervention, turning to mystics and faith healers. Rasputin, with his growing reputation as a miracle worker from the Holy Land of Siberia, was introduced to the imperial couple around 1905, initially just one of several healers, but his power was solidified after a severe crisis, when Alexei suffered a life-threatening hemorrhage, an internal bleed that caused him unbearable agony and left the court doctors defeated. Alexandra sent a desperate telegram to Rasputin. The healer arrived, sat by the boy's bedside, spoke with a compelling authority, and, through methods that remain a complete mystery, commanded the bleeding to stop. And it stopped. The doctors couldn't explain it. The mother saw a miracle. From that moment forward, Rasputin became indispensable to Alexandra, who was convinced he was the only man capable of keeping her beloved son alive. His connection to the air was his divine shield, granting him extraordinary access and influence, making him untouchable in the Empress's eyes. and cementing his position as the most dangerously powerful individual operating outside the formal structure of the Russian state. With his newfound status as the imperial family's personal starets or holy man, Rasputin's presence in St. Petersburg evolved into a political and social contagion that rapidly eroded the Romanovs' already precarious legitimacy. While the royal couple, particularly the Empress, saw him as a spiritual beacon, the Russian nobility, the Orthodox Church hierarchy, and the educated populace viewed him with disgust and fury. They were horrified by the idea that a coarse, uneducated peasant, often drunk and always sexually scandalous, could have such unchecked influence over the sovereign. Whispers and then open accusations of Rasputin's notorious debauchery, stories of drunken orgies, brazen womanizing, and accepting bribes to intervene in state appointments fueled sensational press coverage, both at home and abroad. His strange, heretical theology, which allegedly suggested that salvation could only be attained through an experience of profound sin followed by sincere repentance, provided a dark justification for his excesses. The situation became catastrophically unmanageable in 1915 when Tsar Nicholas II made the fateful decision to take personal command of the massive, struggling Russian armies on the Eastern Front, leaving the government entirely in the hands of his wife, Empress Alexandra. Because Alexandra refused to make any serious decision without first consulting the man of God, Rasputin became the de facto ruler of the Russian interior. He ruthlessly used his position to appoint and dismiss ministers based on his own whims or those of his greedy supplicants, installing one incompetent official after another in key government positions, effectively paralyzing the administration during a critical wartime period. These political appointments, combined with the escalating war casualties and the persistent rumors of the Empress and Rasputin's alleged treasonous German sympathies, convinced the nation's political elite that the dynasty was not just misguided, but actively being corrupted by a malevolent force. The final, explosive conclusion among those who wished to preserve the monarchy was chillingly simple. Rasputin had to die for Russia to survive. The plot to assassinate Rasputin was conceived and executed by a cabal of high-ranking aristocrats and politicians, including the highly influential and flamboyant Prince Felix Yusupov, a distant relative of the Tsar, who believed he was performing the ultimate patriotic act. On the night of the 29th of December, 1916, Yusupov lured Rasputin to his opulent Moika palace, promising a meeting with his beautiful wife, who was conveniently absent. In the palace basement, Yusupov served the unsuspecting mystic tea, wine, and cakes heavily laced with cyanide, a deadly poison. The plot immediately went awry. Rasputin consumed the deadly treats without showing any ill effect, merely appearing slightly drowsy. Panic set in. The conspirators, who were waiting upstairs, began to suspect that the monk was truly protected by supernatural or demonic forces. Finally, Prince Yusupov resolved to use brute force, returning to the basement where he shot Rasputin at close range with a revolver. The monk collapsed, and the conspirators left the body to ensure the coast was clear. But the horror wasn't over. Yusupov returned to find Rasputin's body suddenly twitching. The mystic leapt up, lunging wildly at the prince and stumbling toward the courtyard, shouting, "Felix! Felix! I will crush you!" The other conspirators rushed out, riddling Rasputin's fleeing body with 3 more bullets. Even after multiple gunshot wounds, he still showed signs of life, forcing them to beat him brutally before finally wrapping his body in a heavy cloth and sinking it into the freezing waters of the Malaya Neva River. When the body was recovered 3 days later, the forensic post-mortem contained the final, stunning mystery. The official cause of death was drowning, suggesting the heavily poisoned, shot, and beaten monk was still struggling for life when he entered the icy river. This incredible resilience, which cemented his legend as the Mad Monk, sealed the fate of the Romanovs. Within 2 months of his murder, the February Revolution began. Rasputin's death failed to save the monarchy. Instead, it simply removed the final, fragile psychological crutch holding up the Empress's resolve. The scandal he caused, and the violence required to remove him, demonstrated to the entire Russian populace that the imperial system was terminally broken, paving the way for the revolution that would sweep away the Tsar and his entire family forever.